Genshin Impact has 5 different categories of weapons, and some categories are very good and some categories of weapon are not so good. So today I will give you best weapons from each of the categories. But as always, I'm not going to give you just one weapon. Instead, I will give you 4 weapons from each category. One 5-star DPS and 4-star DPS weapon, and the other 2 will be a 5-star support weapon and a 4-star support weapon from each of the categories. So with that being said, let's start with the least powerful and popular class of weapons, Claymore. So Claymores has a very scarce selection of weapons, but the best 5-star DPS Claymore is most definitely going to be Redhorn Stone Thrasher. This weapon has a low amount of base attack, but it has a massive 88.2% crit damage, which makes this weapon very valuable despite its low base attack. And the passive of this weapon is defense related, so the passive increases defense by 28%. Additionally, normal and charge attack damage is increased by 40% of the character's defense. So this passive is primarily focused for the defense scaling DPS like Noel and Ito, but all the other Claymore characters can still benefit this buff, but they cannot utilize this weapon's passive to the fullest like Ito and Noel can. But even without the passive, the stats that this weapon provides are more than enough to make this weapon the best 5-star DPS Claymore weapon. As for the best 5-star support Claymore, well, I hate to say it, but there is not a single 5-star Claymore support weapon. Most of the 5-star Claymores are DPS oriented, but there is one weapon who has some kind of supporting utilities, and it is the Wolf's Gravestone. Now this weapon is also a kind of a DPS weapon. It has decent base attack and it has a passive attack percent of 49.6%. So this weapon gives a ton of attack. So the supporting comes from the passive of this weapon. It increases attack by 20%. On hit, attacks against opponents with less than 30% HP increases all party members attack by 40% for 12 seconds. So this is the support part of this weapon. So you can equip this weapon on anyone, and if they hit an enemy whose HP is less than 30%, then all of your party will get a 40% attack boost, which is pretty good. So Wolf's Gravestone is the closest thing to a 5-star support Claymore. Now let's move on to the best 4-star DPS Claymore, and it is going to be Serpent Spine. Now this is a battle pass weapon, but this is one of the best battle pass weapons. It has a decent amount of base attack and it has passive crit rate of 27.6%, and the passive of this weapon is equally as powerful. Every 4 seconds a character is on the field, they will deal 6% more damage and take 3% more damage, and this effect can stack up to a maximum of 5 times. So if you can reach the max amount of stacks of the passive, then your character will do 30% more damage and they will also take 15% more damage, but that can be easily mitigated by using a shield or a healer. So you are getting a decent amount of base attack, decent crit rate, and a very good passive from a 4-star weapon. So Serpent Spine is the best 4-star DPS Claymore. And as for the best 4-star support Claymore, it is very clearly an obvious choice. It is the Favonius Greatsword. Now the whole Favonius weapon series will make an appearance in this video because they are the best 4-star supporting weapons. Favonius Greatsword has a very low base attack, but it has a massive amount of 61.3% energy recharge, and the passive also generates energy particles after hitting a critical hit. So whenever you can't decide a weapon for a support character, just slap on a Favonius weapon on them, because having more energy is always a good thing. Next category of weapon is Catalyst. Now Catalyst is a category of weapons which are very niche for 1 or 2 specific characters, but the best 5-star DPS Catalyst in my opinion will be the Tome of the Eternal Flow. Now this weapon, similar to the Redhorn Stone Thrasher, has a low amount of base attack and also a very high 88.2% crit damage, which makes this weapon very powerful. But unlike the Stone Thrasher, this weapon's passive can be used on many characters. So the passive increases HP by 16%, and when current HP increases or decreases, charge attack damage will be increased by 14% up to a maximum of 3 stacks. And when you have 3 stacks, 8 energy will be restored. Now this passive is much better because many Catalyst characters rely on charge attacks, and even if you have to increase or decrease your current HP to get the buff, there is Furina who can do this. So this weapon can be used on basically anyone if you run Furina with them, which makes this weapon very valuable and in my opinion the best 5-star DPS Catalyst. As for the best 5-star support Catalyst, there are very few options and almost all of them are very niche, but for the best 5-star Catalyst, I am selecting 1000 Floating Dreams. Now this weapon has a low amount of base attack, but it has a massive 265 elemental mastery, and the passive of this weapon is also dedicated to elemental mastery. So party members other than the equipping character will provide the equipping character with buffs based on whether their elemental type is the same as the wielder or not. So if their elemental types are the same, it will increase the elemental mastery by 32, and if not, it will increase the equipping character's damage bonus for their respective elemental type by 10%. and each of the aforementioned type can be stacked up to 3 times. So with the max stacks, you can get either 96 elemental mastery or 30% elemental damage bonus of your respective type, which makes this weapon very powerful for any sub DPS or even supports who can do a little bit of damage. Additionally, all party members other than the equipping character will have their elemental mastery increased by 40. But many Catalyst support characters rely on elemental mastery to give various buffs like Nahida and also Sucrose. So in my opinion, this weapon will be the best supporting weapon and also kind of a hybrid sub DPS weapon. Hence why I am giving this weapon the best 5-star support. Now moving on to the best 4-star DPS catalyst, I have two weapons here, the Solar Pearl and the Widsith. Now both of these weapons are equally powerful in my opinion. So the Solar Pearl and the Widsith both have the same amount of base attack being 510, and they both have crit rate and crit damage respectively. The Solar Pearl has 27.6% crit rate and the Widsith has 55.1% crit damage. So both of the stats are very valuable and both of the passives are also equally powerful. Solar Pearl's passive increases elemental skill and burst damage by 20% after a normal attack hits any enemy. Likewise, elemental skill or elemental burst hit increases normal attack damage by 20%. So the passive is very powerful, but it does not increase charge attack damage. So this weapon is not very ideal for new Violet or any other charge attacking DPS. And as for the Widsith, so its passive is very much RNG. So you can have 1 out of 3 buffs. You can have a 60% attack increase, or you can have a 48% all elemental damage bonus, or you can have an elemental mastery boost of 240. And these buffs will only take place when your character leaves the field and then you switch to them. And these buffs last for 10 seconds and can occur every 30 seconds. So if this buff was not RNG dependent, then this weapon would have been the best 4-star DPS catalyst. But due to this weapon being reliant on RNG, I have to give the best 4-star DPS catalyst position to both Solar Pearl and the Widsith. And as for the best 4-star support catalyst, again we have the Favonius Codex. Now this weapon, unlike the Favonius Greatsword, has a high base attack being 510 and lower energy recharge of 45.9%, and the passive remains the same. It generates 6 energy particles when you score a critical hit, and this can occur every 12 seconds. So the Favonius weapons will keep on making an appearance throughout this entire video, so you have to be prepared for them. Moving on to one of the best category of weapons in the game, polearms. Now polearms have a very good selection of weapons, but the best 5-star DPS polearm, I will give this spot to Staff of Homa. Now Staff of Homa has a good amount of base attack and also a good amount of crit damage, and the passive is also pretty good. HP is increased by 20%. Additionally, provides an attack bonus based on 0.8% of the wielder's max HP, and when the wielder's max HP is less than 50%, this attack bonus is increased by an additional 1% of max HP. So Staff of Homa with its passive gives a lot of attack bonus, and attack bonus is a very universal buff. Any polearm DPS can use this buff, and this paired with the good amount of base attack and crit damage of the weapon makes it an overall very good DPS weapon for any character. So Staff of Homa being a very universal DPS weapon is the reason why Staff of Homa is the best 5-star DPS polearm. And as for the best 5-star support polearm, well again we don't have a single choice here except the Calamity Queller. Now this is the only pure support weapon designed for Shenhe, who gives her damage bonus based on her attack. That's why the Calamity Queller has the highest amount of base attack with 16.5% attack percent. So Calamity Queller gives a shit ton of attack, and this weapon is the best for Shenhe, so it makes sense why this weapon gives a ton of attack. But aside from this weapon, there is not a single 5-star, so I had to give this place to Calamity Queller. As for the best 4-star DPS polearm, as much as I wanted to give this spot to the Catch, there is clearly a better option available, which is the Deathmatch. Now Deathmatch has a low amount of base attack, but it has a high 36.8% crit rate, which is very valuable, and the passive is also pretty powerful. If there are at least 2 opponents nearby, attack is increased by 16% and defense is also increased by 16%. And if there are fewer than 2 opponents nearby, attack is increased by 24%. So this weapon is giving a good amount of crit rate just by having enemies nearby, which makes the Deathmatch a better option than the Catch, because the Deathmatch with its crit rate and passive is a very universal DPS weapon, unlike the Catch, which is much more focused on purely elemental burst damage dealers. So this is the reason why Deathmatch is the best 4-star DPS polearm. And for the best 4-star support polearm, well again we have the Favonius Lance. It has the highest amount of base attack out of any of the Favonius weapons and the lowest energy recharge, and with the same passive that generates 6 energy particles whenever you score a critical hit. So Favonius Lance being the best 4-star support polearm is not surprising this deep in the video. Next category of weapons are swords, and swords, same with polearm, have a very good selection of DPS weapons, but the best 5-star DPS sword in my opinion is the Primordial Jade Cutter. So the Primordial Jade Cutter also has a low amount of base attack, but with a massive 44.1% crit rate. So this is the thing that makes this weapon weapon very powerful, and also the passive is quite similar to the Staff of Homa. HP is increased by 20% and additionally provides an attack bonus based on 1.2% of the wielder's max HP. So this weapon is basically Staff of Homa with crit rate for swords. So for the crit rate and the passive alone, this weapon is a phenomenal choice for any sword damage dealers. Hence why Primordial Jet Cutter is my pick for the best 5-star DPS sword. And as for the best 5-star support sword, it is the one and only choice, Freedom Sword. Now Freedom Sword is Kazuha's signature weapon, so it has good 608 base attack and very high 198 elemental mastery, and this long passive basically boils down to increases damage dealt by 10%, and when the character wielding this weapon triggers elemental reactions, they will gain a Sigil of Rebellion, and this effect can be triggered once every 0.5 seconds and can be triggered even if the character is not on the field. So when you possess 2 Sigils of Rebellion, all of them will be consumed and all nearby party members will obtain the Millennial Movement Song of Resistance for 12 seconds, and this Millennial Movement increases normal, charge and plunging damage by 16% and increases attack by 20%. So this is a very good support weapon for any kind of normal, charge or plunging attack damage dealers, and you will use this weapon ideally with a character who can trigger reactions very quickly. So Freedom Sword is the best 5-star support sword. And as for the best 4-star DPS sword, so this was a very hard choice for me, but in the end I went with the Wolf's Fang. So this is a new battle pass weapon and it has 510 base attack and 27.6 crit rate, and the passive of this weapon is damage dealt by elemental skill and elemental burst is increased by 16%, and when an elemental skill hits an opponent, its crit rate will be increased by 2%, and when an elemental burst hits an opponent, its crit rate will be increased by 2%, and both of these effects last for 10 seconds separately and has 4 stacks. So this weapon is giving you 16% elemental skill and burst damage plus an additional 8% crit rate for your elemental skill and elemental burst. And my reason for picking the Wolf's Fang as the best 4-star DPS sword is that this passive is dedicated to only elemental skill and elemental burst, but majority of sword DPS characters primarily uses their elemental skill and elemental burst as their primary source of damage. So this weapon can be used on basically every sword DPS character, and this is the reason why I'm picking Wolf's Fang as the best 4-star DPS weapon. And as for the best 4-star support sword, it is once again Favonius Sword. So Favonius Sword has 454 base attack with 61.3% energy recharge and with the same passive of generating 6 energy particles whenever you hit a critical hit. But here I will also give this spot to the Sacrificial Sword because Sacrificial Sword is very good on many sword characters like Xingqiu, Kazuha, etc. So Favonius Sword and the Sacrificial Sword, depending on the situation, are the best 4-star support swords. And last but not least, we have my favorite weapon category, bows, and the best 5-star DPS bow is the Aqua Simulacra. Now Aqua Simulacra also has a low amount of base attack being only 542 with a massive 88.2% crit damage. So you know this weapon is a good weapon, but the passive is also very good. HP is increased by 16%, but when there are opponents nearby, the damage dealt by the wielder of this weapon is increased by 20%, and this will take effect whether the character is on field or not. So you're getting a 20% damage increase just by being near enemies. So this passive combined with the sheer amount of stats this weapon provides are exceptionally good. So this is a very all-rounder DPS weapon for any kind of on-field or even off-field damage dealers. So this is why Aqua Simulacra is my pick for the best 5-star DPS bow. And as for the best 5-star support bow, we have the only clear winner for the best support weapon in the entire video, and it is the Elegy of the End. Now Elegy of the End has good 608 base attack and 55.1% energy recharge, and the passive is also very universal, increases elemental mastery by 60, and when the elemental skill or elemental burst of the character wielding this weapon hits opponents, the character gains Sigil of Remembrance and can be triggered even if the said character is not on the field. And when you possess 4 Sigils of Remembrance, all of them will be consumed and all party members will obtain the Millennial Movement Farewell Song effect for 12 seconds, and basically this effect increases elemental mastery by 100 and increases attack by 20%. So Elegy of the End is basically a better version of the Freedom Sword. So the elemental mastery and the attack bonus buff are pretty universal and can be used with many different characters. So Elegy of the End is a very good support weapon and arguably the best support weapon in the game. So Elegy being the best 5-star support bow is not a surprise, and also one of my favorite weapons as well. And as for the best 4-star DPS bow, it was also a very hard choice for me, but I picked up 2 weapons because I couldn't make up my mind for for one weapon. So the two weapons are Scion of the Blazing Sun and the Stringless. So the Scion of the Blazing Sun has 565 base attack with 18.4 crit rate, and its passive is after a charge attack hits an opponent, a Sunfire arrow will descend upon the opponent, dealing 60% attack as damage and applying the Heart Searer effect to the opponent's damage by the said arrow for 10 seconds, and opponents affected by Heart Searer will take 28% more charge attack damage from the wielder. So this weapon is a very good choice for any charge attacking DPS, whereas the Stringless has 510 base attack with 165 elemental mastery, and it increases elemental skill and elemental burst damage by 24% with the passive. So the Scion of Blazing Sun has better stats and has a passive dedicated to charge attacking DPSs, whereas the Stringless has elemental mastery and a passive oriented towards elemental skill and elemental burst damage increase. So Stringless will be very good in reaction teams because of the elemental mastery. So I just couldn't decide only one out of these two weapons. So these two are your best 4-star DPS bows. And as for the best 4-star support bow, we have the Favonius War Bow. It has 554 base attack and 61.3 energy recharge with the same old passive of generating 6 energy particles whenever you create a critical hit. So these were all of the best weapons from each of the weapon categories. So if you have any arguments against the weapon that I chose, or if you think that I chose the wrong weapon for a category, then do let me know your opinions and choices in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, then it will be really appreciated if you can like this video and also subscribe to the channel while you're at it. And my voice is dying, so I'll see you in the next one.